Next time we may have more people. It's been a funny class for ups and downs. Let's see. This is our last talk on Hawaiian mythology, or using Hawaiian mythology as a springboard into mysticism. And one of the things that we've noted about Hawaiian mythology is that there's a very close association with nature and nature forces and divinities. This is true of all mythologies, but it is more so than in most mythologies. In general, societies that are illiterate or semi-literate seem to use nature and the images of nature as a language rather than a completely artificial language such as our language is. This is not inapt, because I find for myself that there's hardly a year that goes by that I don't get a major, if not several, major insights into the nature of reality in mysticism by working in the garden and understanding things that happen in the garden. So I think it's a really good way to look at life, provided that you don't think that nature is the total reality itself. So it forms its own language. In many cases, people who are illiterate or not high in literacy, they have not gone very far in taming nature. And as a consequence, they're often dependent on nature. And being at its mercy, they feel that they must propitiate it, and that there is something like a nature worship that comes up in such societies. That's only partially true with the Hawaiians, because the Hawaiians did have some agriculture. They raised various vegetables, and they raised animals and chickens, and they had some pisciculture. They had fish ponds that they raised fish in for their own use. Again, they were not a people that were bent on intellectual pursuit. And if you're not putting all of your consciousness into intellectual pursuit and artificial or abstracted understandings of reality, you can put much more into your senses and into your receptivity. And so the Hawaiians were a very, very sensitive people, and that is the way a lot of their spirituality and a lot of their mythology developed. But with the Hawaiians, there's another factor with regard to nature worship, one that we've discussed before, and that is the combination of an extremely mild climate and isolation. In fact, even the isolation is responsible for the mild climate, as well as being in the tropics, being surrounded by water. Everything gets moderated, and you have a much more even or mild climate. And they didn't too much have to defend themselves from outsiders as much as from themselves, because the ocean made them invulnerable to invasion, so they didn't have to worry about that. In fact, they welcomed the most people who did make it to their islands, which in some cases probably was not a good idea. Their climate was so mild that they didn't have to spend a lot of time providing shelter for themselves. They could be outdoors most of the time, and they could be right among nature. And there weren't many land animals that were predators. There weren't even a lot, if any, snakes. The main predators were sharks and octopi and eels. Eels come up quite a bit in their mythology, and we'll even go into a little bit of that tonight. The things that were there to fear were more elemental. Great storms, typhoons, things like that, and volcanism. And it is in the nature part of their worship that volcanism and storms play a large part. It's central. The nature forces is central to their worship, as we're going to find out in just a minute. In fact, the divinities that we've been looking at, the Trinity of Kane, Ku, and Hina, and Lono, they are abstract. And while they were understood as being the high gods, not a whole lot of attention was paid to them. Much more was paid to the divinities that had to do with devastation and destruction. So in Hawaii, Pele was the goddess of volcanism, and she was universally feared and propitiated, especially on the big island Hawaii, where there were and still are active volcanoes. The temperament of Pele as a goddess was identical with volcanism. It was powerful, it was explosive, it was destructive, it was hot, it was, there's Jerry, unpredictable, and in a way jealous of territory, always trying to take over new territory. But most of all, it was fiery. Right, Jerry? Competitively fiery. You might even say that Pele was something like the Agni of the Hawaiians. However, they did have a fire god that was an abstract fire divinity, but the abstract fire divinity was not as important as Pele, who had her expression in something much, much more immediate, much closer to home. And so she was probably one of the most powerful of all of the goddesses. She was known in an abstract sense, but mostly she was known as a spirit goddess or in her human-like forms. The Hawaiians saw almost all of their gods and goddesses and demigods and demons and everything else. They saw them all as human or at least anthropomorphic, and that they would at will incarnate or take human form or consolidate in such a way that they looked like humans. And so it was a very tangible. It wasn't the anthropomorphization like the Greeks, which was mostly only in stories. It was something much more tangible. One might wonder whether they didn't have a clairvoyance, and it certainly did, some of the people, as you're going to see in the stories, where they saw entities materialize out of the etheric realm and out of the more rare parts of nature. Kahuna, which is their form of magic or control, is just filled with stories about materializations and incantations to and from spirit beings and even from the great gods. So magic was very much a close element. It was a daily practice thing, and unfortunately a lot of the magic was very unpleasant. And it was almost like some of the magic in Africa is now, where there were continuous power struggles between different kahunas. That's often the case when there's a mild climate, and especially a mild, moist climate. There is more of a tendency to practice of sorcery. One need only go to New Orleans to see that. Pele is part of a very large family. However, the number of her family is ambiguous. Some say 12, and some say 13. It's one of those principles, again, of octavation. The whole idea that in the three-dimensional realm, the most points that you can get around a central point are 12 around the 13th, and that when you get to those 12 with the 13th, that provides a whole octave which can be packed around with another 12 around the 13th, and like you grow geometrically in that way. There are 7 sons and 5 or 6 daughters. Probably the 6th daughter is Pele, being in the center of the dodecahedron. And this is common also, to not divide 6 and 6, but to divide 7 and 5. In the principle of octavation, as we see it in 12-tone music, we have the 7 naturals, which are associated with the spectral colors or with the primal forms or globes through which things are accomplished. And then we have the 5 sharps or flats, which represent the destructive and assimilative forces that break things down and assimilate them back into chaos after the creative work has been done. Says this is all pretty much, again, almost surprising, but I guess it shouldn't be, that the Hawaiian mythology is almost like every other mythology of the world. In the Pele myths, and there are many of them, and there are legends, and there are things that relate to all the family, especially the sisters, only 4 of the members of the family play a very large role. There is Ka Moho Ali, who's called Molo, Moho, and he is a brother that is a kahuna, and he does a lot of the magic and is very forceful in that. Another brother is Ke Ahi Kama Kaua, and he's commonly just called Kama Kauho, just the same way that Moho is a shortening. And he is again something like a kahuna, but he is humpbacked. He is deformed, and this is something again that goes back into a lot of myths where one of the greater creative divinities, such as Hephaestus Vulcan, is lame or crippled. And there are 2 sisters that are famous in the family, and we're going to spend a lot of time with both of them. There is Hi'iaka Ika Pole O Pele. And she... I've had a lot of time. I've had really fun going through the Hawaiian. I can get all of these books, and I'm thinking of doing it just for the fun of it. They have recorded all of these Hawaiian chants, and they have them like on 2 faces, one side Hawaiian and one side phonetic Hawaiian and one side English, and it would be fun to go through some of those chants, but they're enormously long. We're going to talk about one in a little bit that is 16 hours long, and it's not written down. Can you imagine being a kid having to learn a 16-hour chant and to know all of the movements of the hands and everything that goes with it? It's just unbelievable. But anyway, Hi'iaka is the foreshortening of her name, and she is the sister, a younger sister, that is born in the shape of an egg, and Pele carries her in her armpit in her early days until she comes into human form. And finally, the last of the 4 that is commonly spoken of is Pele herself. The brothers are for the most part associated with destructive things, thunderstorms and vicissitudes of nature and things that rend things apart. The sisters, for the most part, the only thing that they have in common, with the exception of Pele, is cloud formations. They are all associated with different kinds of cloud formations as well as particular shapes of clouds. And the one exception is Pele, who is the volcanic goddess. She is associated with what is called Aumakua religion, which is the worship of volcanic deities. And there is a large collection of Aumakua stories and legends and tales that are something like Pablo Neruda's Stones of Chile. They see all of these weird shapes of lava, and they have all of these stories of what deities have done and how they have been frozen as history into these lava forms. So it's a very, very imaginative type of religion. Again, if you're not so limited by words and you can look at forms themselves, you can really let your imagination go. It is from the Aumakua religion that almost all of the modern hula and kahuna were derived and developed. That is to say that from the volcanic religions and those kinds of movements, and having that as a powerful force in their life, led to both hula as a form of expression, and hula includes chanting, as Pat told us last time, and kahuna, which is a way to control the forces of nature. The family is born from a couple. The mother is called Haumea, and the father is Moe Moe A Aulii, but they just shorten and say Moe Moe. Again, we find nature things. Even in her human form, she's described in terms of nature, and Pele is described as an exceedingly beautiful woman, sometimes even blonde, as we're going to see. And her back is as straight as a cliff, and her breasts are rounded like the moon. So she has a really, nature way. She's restless, and she has to move, and she has to change, and she longs to travel. And so what she does is she takes Hi'iaka as an egg and tucks her under her armpit and takes off. Her brother Moho gives her a canoe, and her brother's whirlwind, tide, and current are paddlers for her, and she moves. And her great hope is to have a family mansion. Only her idea of a family mansion is like that of Hawaii, where they needed something cool. They did a lot of pit homes. They would build huts over the top of pits, and they would take advantage of the coolness of the earth. And the family, though it probably originated in Kahiki, which is that mythical island in the spiritual worlds, it now lives in the northwestern islands. And she passes southeastward through the islands, first through the hidden islands, where Kane, as a cloud, remember Kane is the invisible first member of the Trinity, and he hides the islands so that even Pele can't see them, and she goes past them, and she visits an island called Ni'ihau, where Ka'o'ahi, flamethrower, is a chiefess. And she's royally entertained, and she learns about throwing flames there. Next she comes to one of the northwest islands of the Hawaiian chain, which plays a large part in her myth. It's Kauai. And when she's there, she takes a human form. And she participates in a hula festival, and it's sort of a competition. And there's a very handsome young chieftain there who is called Lohiau. And she falls in love with him, and she vows that he is going to be her husband, and she wins him in the hula contest. But she's still restless, and she continues to go southeastwardly from island to island. And on each island she comes to, she tries to dig a pit deep enough and large enough for her whole big family, the parents and the 12 brothers and sisters of her. In each case, the islands are too small because when she digs down, she strikes water, and she being hot and fiery like the lava, that's inimical to her nature, and she has to move on. Finally, she comes to Hawaii, the big island, where it is large enough that she can dig very deep and dig a very large pit and do so without striking water, and she settles there, and she's there today, the island with the live volcanoes. In some versions, one of the Kane gods is her father, and she coalesces with the fire gods, or with the original fire god, the more abstract one, and she produces a huge conflagration. And she, in order to put the fire out, one of her sisters, who is a sea goddess, chases her from island to island trying to put the fire out, and she claims each of the islands by leaving one of her brothers behind as an outguard or something like that. Eventually she and her sister have it out in a martial art contest, and Pele is torn apart, and her heap of bones is a very special configuration on Maui, and her spirit takes refuge in the volcano in Hawaii. In yet another version, she is born to Kane and a goddess, and she has a husband who is enticed away from her. And she chases the goddess, or goes searching for him, followed by the sea and inundations from island to island. In still other versions, her father is something more like a mortal, and he's a cannibal. And her mother is somehow transformed into a cliff, and out of the parts of her body, the 12 children are born, like the 12 signs of the zodiac. It's one of those division signs, one of those division myths. I've got a bunch of readings, so let's take some little readings at different places along the line. This is talking about the history of Pele. I won't try to read it in Hawaii, and I've tried it, and I've been able to get through it, but not really smoothly. The woman Pele comes from Kahiki, from the land of Pola Pola, from the ascending mist of Kane, from the clouds that move in the sky, from the pointed clouds born at Kahiki. The woman Pele was restless for Hawaii. Fashioned the canoe Hanua Iakea as a canoe o Kamohoali'i for venturing to the island. Completed, equipped is the canoe of the gods, the canoe for Pele of the sacred earth to sail in. From the straight course the heavenly one turned and went around the island, and the multitude of gods stepped ashore, who were behind at the stern of the canoe. The household of Pele and her company, those who bail, those who work the paddles on the canoe, were Ku and Lono. It came to the island, rested there. The island rose before them. Hi'iaka stepped ashore, seeking for increase of divinity, went and came to the house of Pele. The gods of Kahiki burst into lightning flame with roar and tumult. Lightning flames gushed forth, burst forth with a roar. It's a nice little excerpt. Very pretty. I think they have an appreciation of beauty that is almost endless. If we take the whole myth, the wandering myth of Pele, as a composite, and take it as a broad or vague generality, it bears a lot in common with other creation myths and cosmological myths we have examined. The source of Pele is an invisible, source, either Kane, behind the cloud-covered islands, or some other invisible source. She is a central creative figure in a family with cosmic proportions, a dodecal family. And she's born in succession or by division of a unified body, much the same way that Osiris or Adam or other divinities broke apart and formed lower hierarchies. She's restless and seeking something that she isn't, which is often the case with all divinities. It's either a human or something cool. Because she's hot, she wants something cool, something that she can unite with. So she wants her opposite, which is often the case. If you remember the Hindu myths that we've looked at in terms of creation, divinities were lonely, and they recognized the single-sided nature, and they sought out some kind of opposite, and that is the way creation became fulfilled. She meets calamitously with her antithesis, and in the meeting of hot lava and cold water, all sorts of things happen, petrification and floods and fires and everything else, and she finally rests in a standoff. Again, it's like a homeostasis. Everything where there is a completed creation has a homeostasis in it, or else it couldn't remain in completion, and it is by slight changes in imbalance that there is any improvement or any forwarding of the homeostasis. So this is a pretty good cosmological formula and a pretty good description of creative process. It is especially good in bringing out the need for something we aren't. Implicit in that is a statement of incompleteness. God knows how many people are looking for a mate, not to realize that when they find it, that's only the beginning, that the seeking for something that you aren't, or to fulfill the incompleteness, which can never be fulfilled because the absolute is endless, it's eternal. But the sense of seeking something you aren't is very strong, and it leads to the pilgrimage of creation. And it also has the whole idea of creativity, because you get the sense of her that, like with her volcanic outbursts, like she's filled to bursting, even so filled that her outbursts are destructive. And so she has to give, and she has to have some kind of opposite to give to. Now, volcanoes have in all forms of mysticism been considered places of great creative energy. They are where a lot of evolutionary changes come about. In the area of Kamchatka, there are kinds of species being developed all the time. In the volcanism beneath the Atlantic Ocean, there are species being developed. But it goes beyond that. There's that interesting passage in the novel Zanoni, where Zanoni comes out of the crater of a volcano and comes walking down the mountain, and he's invigorated by the creative energy that he's drawn from the gases that come out of the earth that are purely creative themselves. And we have stories like Empedocles and the Promethean creative fires. In fact, there's a story just like the Promethean story, but the fire isn't taken from heaven. It's taken from stalks that have been in the volcanic lava, and that is one of the ways that fire is brought to people. What's really interesting about this myth, and it's very unusual, is that the whole journey of Pele goes from northwest to southeast, which, according to plate tectonics, is the way the islands were created. first the ones in the northwest and then the ones in the southeast, that volcanoes came up by successively and then died out and the islands were left behind. Now, if Hawaiian civilization is less than 2,000 years old, as anthropologists think, how could they possibly know this when this process of volcanization, undersea volcanization, producing islands, has been going on for tens of thousands of years? If this isn't an argument in itself for clairvoyance, it's astounding, that they should know this and that they could have that right in the story. All right. We're going to go into the second main stage of the Pele myth, and then we'll do one other main myth, and that'll be it for the night. The second stage of the Pele myth is called the Hi'iaka story. This part of the myth takes place when she has already settled in Hawaii. At the time of the story, she has made a home for her sisters and brothers in the cool crater of Mokua Whale Whale. And what happens is she goes into some kind of a trance-like state and has her sister Hi'iaka guard her body so that nobody can take it. And when she's out of the body, she follows a trail of flute music, which is a sound power that goes through the ethers. And she follows it northwest to Kauai, where she saw the beautiful Lohiau. And she comes there and she reassembles her ghost body into that of a beautiful woman. And she enters the hula contest, and there's this very, very beautiful man, Lohiau, and he wins her as her husband, and he falls in love with her, and she bids him, wait until I send my messenger for you, and but I have to leave now. And at that point, she disappears, and back at Mokua Whale Whale, what happens is Hi'iaka was greatly concerned because she was out of the body so long, and she's really relieved when she comes back to her body and starts coming back to life again. Pele tells Hi'iaka the whole story and tells everybody, the whole world, that she's in love and she's won herself a husband and she's finally going to have the fulfillment that she wants in an opposite. But she realizes she has to stay home and mind the store. So she asks for a volunteer to be a messenger to go to Kauai and get her husband. Finally, only Hi'iaka is brave enough to volunteer to be the messenger, but she demands all of her sister's magical powers because she realizes this is going to be a dangerous trip. And Pele gives her all of these, and as a goodwill gesture gives her some of the groves of sacred trees on the sides of the mountain, which are very dear to Hi'iaka, gives her them as a gift, and gives her her friend Hopoi to give her care. And Pele says to Hi'iaka, I give you 40 days to complete the task of going to Kauai and getting my husband and bringing him back. And the second part of the command is, don't mess with my man. We already have drama. Now what ensues is an enormously long story, which we're going to cut down really short. Hi'iaka takes her own nurse, who is called Pau'upala'i, part of the way for comfort, and all of the way there and back, she takes a half-goddess or a demi-goddess who is called Wahine Omao, or Thrush Woman. And for a while, another girl joins along, but she can't withstand even the first trial and goes back. First, they take an upland path, which means that they have to clear the way of the Mo'o people and the Mo'o people's demons. And the uplanders were sometimes considered real hillbillies, and they were considered savages and such like that, and they were called the Mo'o people. And so by controlling the fog and the rain and entangling growth and lava, she accomplishes this, and in some of the lava flows, some of the Mo'o people can still be seen. Then they come to a toll bridge, and Hi'iaka is a Democrat and can't see the reason for toll bridges, so she wipes off the people that control the toll bridge. And there's also the Hawaiians are not very prudish people, and they dress naked or semi-naked at all times, and they're quite open about all the sexuality. And at the gate there's also some kind of a prudish god who frowns on their looks, and she silences him. And they get to the shore, and they cross over to Maui. And at Maui, they struggle with spirits of people that are out of the body and just spirit demons. And they struggle with them, and they finally cross over to Molokai, where they overcome another lawless Mo'o tribe, which has wiped out the men of another tribe and all the women who are hysterical, and they calm them down and say that eventually you'll have men again and such like that. And then they cross to Oahu, and she decides to take the rocky road, and in doing so, when she gets up into the heights, she encounters some of her supernatural relatives, and she has to do magical battles with them, and she wins, and finally she comes to the shore, and she talks to the boulders and apostrophizes them, and from them begs a canoe and gets to Kauhi. When they get there, they find only the old chief, who is called Mala'e Ha'a'akoa, and he's a lame man, and they heal his lameness, and he then gives them lots of hospitality, and he tells them that Lohiau died of grief when the mystery woman disappeared. He thought he had lost her forever despite what she had said, and he died of grief. And what happens is that two women have stolen his body, and by magic they found a way to stash it in a cave on an inaccessibly high cliff. Inaccessible to anybody but Hi'iaka. She uses chance, and by chance she catches the etheric body of Lohiau and holds it in incantation, and then it takes 10 days to scale the cliff, and then there's a magical ceremony where on the shore beneath the cliff, the people of the island have to do the hula for 10 straight days while she does magic, and she does the resuscitation chant and resuscitates the body. And then they all descend on a rainbow, and they purify themselves in the ocean, and they set out on the journey home. However, it is already past the 40-day limits. They want to take the sea route using a canoe because it's faster, but the shark gods and some of the sea goddesses, who are always enemies of Pele, whip up all kinds of storms and make it difficult so that they can't do it. They can't take the swift way home. So Hi'iaka again decides to go overland, and as she is going across Oahu, she reaches the high point, and she can see way down to Hawaii, and she sees already that the lava fires are destroying her beloved forests, and even her friend Hopoi is being destroyed by the lava flows of her jealous sister Pele. You didn't do it in 40 days. And Pele thinks there's mischief. And so Pele, using the tone power in the ethers, creates a special chant and sends it to Hi'iaka saying, no lovemaking. All the way, Hi'iaka, though she's very much enamored of the very beautiful young man, she does not become unfaithful to her sister, her sister's command. Finally, they get to Hawaii, and they stop at Ko'u, which is the ancient name for Honolulu, and there they are entertained by Peleula, who is a prophetess, and they play a game of kilu. And kilu is, how would you say it? Spin the bottle going all the way. The Hawaiians were famous for having a lot of sex games. And kilu was one where they played spin the bottle, and somebody was designated as the sexual object. And in this case, it was Lohiau. Was designated as a sexual object, and they played spin the bottle. And Peleula wanted to rig the game because she saw he was beautiful, but Hi'iaka got the 10 points. The bottle pointed at her 10 times first, and she won Lohiau, but she still didn't couple with them. She was still faithful to her sister. Advanced messengers are sent to Pele, but she destroys them with lava before they can even give the messages. She's outraged at this point, and she is furious, and she commands her sisters to kill just about everybody, including Lohiau. Lohiau. There, I finally got it. Lohiau. To kill him, everybody, to kill the whole party. And what happens is Peleula escapes, and Hi'iaka is invulnerable because she's got all the magic powers, but Lohiau is burned up by the lava. So she's spiteful. She'll destroy even the things that she loves. His spirit flies to back home to the island of Kauai, and there he sends his friend Paola to Pele as a love gift and as some consolation, because he still loves her. But at this point he also loves Hi'iaka because there was more going on in the game than just sex. And then his spirit flies to Kahiki, and the gods and goddesses on Kahiki restore his spirit to life again, but he's listless. And finally they send bird messengers of the plover and the turnstone, and they distract his interest into human things again and earthly things, and he comes back to life, and he returns to Hawaii. At the home of Peleula, where they had last been together, they are reunited. And they couple right in front of Pele's vision. But it's not clear whether they live happily ever after. And that's the Hi'iaka cycle, a very greatly shortened version of it. And we won't go into any of the many variants of it, because there are many of them. So, we have been treated to a quest myth. But it's also an adventure myth, and it's an odyssey myth. And it's filled with all kinds of engaging symbols, many of which I dropped into telling because it would have been way too long. It would be fun to follow up on them, but we just don't have time to do that. It's also filled with a lot of magic and directly applied occultism that really clearly, even in mythical form, show the principles of magic. It would be fun to elaborate them, but we don't have time for it. And by cross-referencing all the variants, we could come up with all kinds of inner understanding, but we won't do that either. I want to do something very different because it's more pertinent to the themes that we've been developing for the last several years, and because this story offers an example of a relevant principle that we have not really encountered very well in any of these mythical talks. And that is, this is a perfect example of an agency myth. It's something like a Hawaiian version of the courtship of Miles Standish, sending somebody else to court your love. Agency myths are an extremely important part of the principle of creative hierarchy, including the creative hierarchy of which we are part. And all of cosmology has to do with it, and it is, in this case, an expression or an extension of some of the principles of dualism that we've been looking into. In this kind of a myth, a spiritual being chooses not to do something directly and instead sends an agent to do it, either an agent or a deputy or a substitute or a stand-in or something like that. There are various different things. There are different reasons why an agent is sent, but they usually sound far-fetched, but there are some things that spiritual beings cannot do. And the other main reason is that it is wiser or more beneficial for the spiritual being to not directly perform the task, even if they could do it. In the Hi'iaka branch of the Pele myths, Pele certainly could perform the task, but she feels it's much more beneficial to stay home and mind the store and to consolidate her power, and do what she has to do for her whole family and what she does in nature. In the courtship of Miles Standish, Standish can't woo, and so he sends John Alden. So that's a case of the story where somebody can't do something and sends somebody else instead. Actually, if you think about it, both reasons, not being able to do it or being unwilling to do it, turn out to be poles of the same creative and evolutionary principle. As we just said, it sounds implausible, but there are some things that a divine being cannot do. But it really is true that there is no substitute for experience. Everything in all evolution, from the most far-fetched divinity to the lowliest elemental form, everything is accomplished by experience. And unless you have experience, you cannot utilize the fruits of that experience. We know from mystic Christianity that even a lofty spiritual being, such as Christ, had no experience of etheric and physical embodiment. And that in order to come here, Christ could not build a physical or etheric body and had to have an agent, had to use the agency of the physical and etheric bodies of Jesus. Now, gaining experience, it's not to say that Christ couldn't gain the experience, but it is a very slow and a very tedious and a painfully awkward process. Our physical bodies are in a fourth stage of development. We've already gone through a pure form mineral-like state, and a living form plant-like state, and a motive animal-like state, to the point where we can have a body that's highly evolved so that it can be interpenetrated by higher bodies and even the spirit itself. And this is something that has taken us a long, very long time, and it's been slow and tedious. Therefore, it's often wisest to have, when there is a new kind of experience is needed by the universal spirit, it's best to have someone new or young or fresh or ignorant start from the ground up at that kind of activity, so that the new experience and a whole new kind of intelligence grow up together. However, even if we send somebody out to pick up a newspaper for us, we have created a hierarchy. And that means management. How big of a tip do I give the person who goes out to get the paper? And if I have them get the paper every day, how regular does this have to be? As we know from physics, and it's something that carries throughout all the spiritual worlds, in fact, all of what we call karma is dependent on it. Every action has some kind of equal and opposite reaction. It's bidirectional. So what we're looking at here is a bidirectional action in a vertical sense. That is, something is given to an agency for experience, and something elevates one to the point of being a manager or a director or an administrator or something like that. Everybody benefits. Hi'iaka gets lohiau. It's always that way. The agent always gets the prize. Alden gets the girl. This is because direct, immediate interaction yields intimate experience. There can be no substitute for that. Only the beings that have done the close interactive work can get that kind of intimacy. However, Pele gets the whole island. If you work through agencies, you get the essence of their experience, though not the experience. And you get a very big, broad picture and the power that comes from that vantage point. So everybody in a vertical application of action and reaction in an agency, a creative administrator and an agent, everybody benefits in that. A tree grows taller by sending out rootlets that go deeper. But it's more than just perspective. If one derives the essence of experience in lieu of the experience itself, one has something that's more subtle and something that's more general. As we've seen, especially when we talked about Kane, the more subtle something is, the more powerful it is. Until Kane, who represents the Father or who represents the Divine Spirit, is infinitely powerful because completely invisible and always invisible, never manifesting anything that can be seen that would take away from that subtlety. If we begin as a master craftsperson and begin to extend ourselves until we master every craft at every stage of a process, it would be foolish to remain a craftsperson. We have so much that we could give to so many other people and benefit by directing them that, they may be less experienced and it may take a while for them to develop the mastery, But why should one person continuously reinvent the wheel when that consciousness can be spread over many? It's not just even a matter of accumulated skill or being a big boss. Because by the time you get to be the whole process master craftsperson, so that you can administer a general creative project, you're older and you're more mature. And when you start directing other people, you can go into the deeper and more meaningful things of people problems. I can say for myself, I still like science and all the things I used to like when I was young, but they're not as important to me as the humanities, philosophy and art and the things that are about people. So even if there's only one employee, it complicates things and it deepens our understanding because we have to know more than just craft. Even the agent gets much more than the gal or much more than the guy. Aka has been empowered to accomplish her task. So empowered that she's invulnerable to Pele's lava attack. It's a different kind of empowerment and freedom for the agent. The administrator does not have to be in the small, tedious tasks. And it has that indirect but very subtle, all-encompassing power. But the kind of freedom and the power that the agent has is different. If we are an embodiment of a power that's higher than us, we can accomplish tasks that go beyond us. Almost like the ant can thoughtlessly grab onto something and die and become part of a link of a bridge across a fast stream because it is doing something without hesitation. It's serving something higher. It's serving the spirit of that whole ant community. In our own lives, when we do things for the Christ's sake, we can accomplish things that we could never do if we did it out of our own self. I think it was Dostoevsky that said, sacrifice is the chief law of evolution. When we sacrifice the need for personal gratification in experience, or when we sacrifice the need for excessive experience, we can rise as hierarchs, as creative administrators. When we sacrifice personal authority and serve that which is greater than us, we can have clean experience without the cling that comes from selfishness or from personal things. When you think about it, in a hierarchy, as we are, somewhere below the middle of it, we are both creative administrators and we are experiencers. We have both, and we can accomplish the best of both by being impersonal and unselfish. It's only when the selfishness comes in that we have, on one hand, tyrants, and on the other hand, rogue agents, like dumb cops who try to be judge and jury and the whole business all together. This is a really very important principle. So it's a principle we should talk more about, but we just don't have time to go into it. I think it's something that we all contemplate on for a long time. There's a whole lot more that we could say about Pele, both as a divinity and as volcanism itself, but we don't have time for that either. Pele is known to the Tahitians and to the Maori of New Zealand, only there's a funny thing about all people except in the Americas that are on the rim of the Pacific that their languages, they have trouble with the R's and the L's. Like Chinese and Japanese confuse R's and L's in language, and the same thing is true with all Pacific Islanders. They do the same thing. I don't know whether this has something to do with the Pacific or what, but or with the language stem. So I'm going to read a little bit from some very philosophical things from the Tahitians. 3 little excerpts from, they call Pele Pere. The heat of the earth produced Pere, conceiving heat. Goddess of the fire in the earth, a blonde woman. And then came Tama Ihu, or Tamatia. Fire was those gods' agent of power. It obeyed them in the bowels of the earth and in the skies. They were the chief fire gods. Here's another Tahitian extract. The great god Pere, consuming heat, must be goddess of spontaneous burning of the earth. Tama Ihu, blonde child, the brother of Pere, must be the god of heat in the netherlands. And finally, the most philosophical of all, which is almost like the Norse Hela. Pere has light down in the earth without heat. Above is the fire ever burning. Awe-inspiring is the residence of Pere down in the earth. Great are her attendants that follow her below and above the surface of the world. So it's showing the whole idea of the center of the earth as our source of being in touch with the absolute, the ultimate creative agency, and the source of all the new experience of forms. But it's showing also going into the heart of the earth, into invisibility, and showing, I think that's what's meant by the blondness, not necessarily blonde hair, but it's talking about a light without heat, which is what the spiritual light, or what the spirit is like. All right, let's go on to our next. Oh, all right. I have a little more about Pele here. There are other than the Hi'iaka myth and the migration myth, there are all kinds of Pele myths of her family, especially having to do with her sisters. But the principle of creative agency or of creative administration fits throughout everything that has to do with Pele. For example, Ku and Hina used to be in charge of the hula. And this fits very well with what Rudolf Steiner says. Ku Hina represent the second attribute of the Trinity, and therefore they represent the light spirit. Oops, I don't do that. So that if we start from the physical world and work our way up, a lot of Western mystics claim about the same thing, that there's an art for each of the realms that is most perfectly suited to each of the realms. And for the physical plane, the art is architecture. For the etheric plane, it is sculpture, because it shows how energy comes into form. For the desire world, where everything is light in color, it is painting. For the concrete mind, the art is music, because the mental realm is the world of tone. In the ideational mind, where the human spirit is born, drama, where there is the creation of character, is the art. But where in the life spirit, where everything is life, in the highest, most spiritual sense that our consciousness is capable of understanding, the art form is dance. And it was from here that Steiner, for example, took his eurythmy. He says that it relates to the life spirit, and that in dance one can come closest to the life spirit easiest. And it's really interesting because of all the art forms most commonly practiced, the one that you need the least education in to be spontaneously creative and to just flow in the moment is dance. Almost everybody that can dance at all does not have to do specific steps. They can improvise. And improvise belongs to the Uranian quality, the free-form creativity that comes from the life spirit. A very, very interesting sideline. But eventually, Ku and Hina became the administrators of the hula and the kahuna, which belonged to Pele. And in a way, the second leads to the third. Ku-Hina leads to Lono. And with the administration of hula passing from Ku-Hina to Pele, this makes Pele something like a Lono being. In fact, this is so much the fact that if you start looking into the details of things, you find out that the Lohiau, the young man that she marries, is the name of the stick that Pele uses for digging the pits, which is another version of the Lono stick. And the creative fires that are the creative fires of the volcano are none other than the Promethean creative fire that is the sexual energy that rises up the spine in its own kind of volcanism. So it is, this is all very, very, the same principle is there. And even Pele gives up the kahuna to the agency is distributed to two goddesses called Laka and Kapu. They represent her spin-offs to do their own experience. They do their own sacrifice. And Laka then becomes the pole of the generative force that is pure fertility, while Kapu becomes the force that is death-dealing. Sort of like in the Scorpio being the source of the sexual agency is the source of birth and also the source of death. And there's some real pretty chants to Laka and Kapu, the eel woman, that I'd like to read. Thou art Laka, god of the Ali'i plant. Laka from the uplands, Laka from the lowlands, bring the Ai vine that grows in the wildwood, the Ma'aili that wreathes the forests, red beak Kiele, flower of the god, joyous rhythm of dance in honor of Hina Aika, Malama, the eel woman, red Kapu, the eel woman, Laka thou art, God of the altar here, come back, dwell in thine altar, bring it good luck. So the eel woman, eels get a bad reputation in all mythologies, and they're the source of poison and death. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this whole principle ramifies from Ku-Hina through Pele to Laka and Kapu, and that this is indeed a hierarchical principle, and that each step down the hierarchy, things go from the abstract of Ku to the nature force of Pele, and finally to practical magic and practical fertility in the world. And at each step there's a different being that becomes the agent, and the agency then becomes ramifies and diversifies things. All right, now there are all kinds of Pele legends as well as myths. They're really interesting. They go right down to from high myths to kahuna hags who take their eyeballs out and put them on their fish hook and put them in the water, and they catch more fish than other people because they can see what they're going for. They have a very imaginative consciousness. But I want to talk about one more Pele myth that relates to what we're trying to develop in all of these talks, so we don't get too far astray. And that deals with the fondness of Hawaiians. The Hawaiians loved hogs. In fact, they introduced hogs to the islands where they were not native, and they actually changed, is the way the Hawaiians would say it, but the ecologists would say that they degraded the ecology because they wiped out a lot of native species. The Hawaiians were not really too environmental anyway. They extinctified a number of species of birds just for the bright feathers for costumes. They recognized something about the soul nature of birds, and they wanted to decorate themselves in that soul nature. They wanted to mimic the desire body with all its brilliant colors in the physical world, and they made these elaborate costumes with brilliant red bird feathers, and they took out a lot of species doing that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about one of the hog gods or pig gods. His name is Kamapua'a, and he was half human and he was half hog. He was a progenitor of a long line of chiefs and of commoners. And I want to read from an ancestral chant. I'm glad that Pat did what she did last time in talking about ancestral chants, because they're really, really quite lovely. This is one of Kamapua'a's part of his ancestral chant, which is very long. It's 16 hours long. His snout was of great size, and with it he dug the earth. He dug until he raised a great mound. He raised a hill for his gods, a hill, a precipice in front, for the offspring of a pig that was born. All right. What is implied there, it was born like a human. Kamapua'a was a grandson of a sorceress. And the sorceress' name is Kamaunua Niho. And he carried with him all of her traits of sorcery and magical abilities. And his family tree he can trace all the way back to Kahiki, the mythical island, and his influence spread to all of the islands, Maui, Oahu, Kauai, and finally Hawaii. And his lineage is well traced because people always want to be associated with the royal lines, so they keep those lineages very clear. He's tall, just like Pat says. All of the royal people are tall, and he's handsome. And he's called in Hawaii, I won't say the Hawaiian because it's too hard for me. He's called the foreigner with sparkling eyes. He's tough-skinned, and he has bristles down his back. But he hides them by wearing a cape. He's capable of frequently changing himself into a tough-skinned little fish, which is called Humo Humo Nukunuku A Pua'a. And that's a little fish that hides in the cracks of the rock underneath the water. And this is one of the ways that he escapes Pele's lava. He sometimes, instead of transforming himself into a fish, transforms himself into pig grass, which is called Ka'epua'a, which in translation means pig shit. And this is one of the forms that he uses to overcome Lono of the 8 foreheads. And he also uses this form to choke the dog man to death. This is wild stuff. You're sitting around an island and you got no enemies, might as well make up stories. The whole chant of this story takes 16 hours. Ours will take, I hope, less than 6 minutes. It's a quite an interesting story. He's born as a fetus on Oahu. And his older brother is jealous of him. His older brother is called Kahika Honua Kele. And he tries to throw him away, but he's just not about to be thrown away. And his mother goes to the ocean to take a bath of ablution. And when she's purified, she comes out and she finds him laying on her skirt as a piglet. He has hatched out of his fetus state. And she gives him to his brother and says, take him to his grandmother, the sorceress. And he does, and she raises him. He grows up to be a very strong and rough young man, but he's unpopular with his stepfather, Olopana. He's always getting into trouble. And what he does is he's led by supernatural forms to raid the chicken coop and eat the chickens. And each time his grandfather has a larger and larger army until it's in the hundreds to guard the chicken coop, and he still outsmarts them all or overpowers them all and gets into the chicken coop. But finally he outgrows the place, and he can't be contained anymore. And they're in a lonely peak, so what he does is he takes his body, stretches it out, and lays it out, becomes a bridge, and crosses. And when Olopana tries to chase him with his army, because they want to use him as a pig sacrifice, he destroys them. He goes to Kauai, and he courts all the girls there, and he slays all the champions. And he pacifies everybody by learning all of their name chants. So he knows not only his own name chant, but he knows all of the name chants of this and the other islands. He eventually comes to his father and his mother, who are living on Kauai, and they don't recognize him. And he says, Mom, you got to know me. And finally he strips down naked and shows the bristles on his back, and while doing so he chants his name chant, and she finally recognizes him. But he outgrows that place also, and then he takes on his fish form, and he swims to the southern part of the island, and he has all kinds of beneficial adventures there. He weds the chief's daughters, and he makes fishing ponds, and he fights for their brothers, and he wins all kinds of booty. But instead of giving some of it to the king as tribute, he takes it all, keeps it all for himself, so the king banishes him. And so then he goes to Kahiki, the mythical island, for a while, and there he fights with a god called Lono of the Eight Foreheads. And what he does is he changes himself into grass, and he entangles the eight foreheads so that they're non-functional, and he smothers them. And then the dog man comes to the aid of Lono, and he, as grass, jumps in the dog man's throat and chokes him. Finally, he decides to come back to Earth, and he comes to Hawaii, and he comes to Pele's sacred crater. And he sees her, and she's absolutely beautiful. And so he woos her in the form of a handsome man. She's haughty, and she insultingly refers to him as a pig and the son of a pig. And so his love songs turn to taunts, and he comes closer and closer to her. And as I was making these notes, I remembered the universal high school Hawaiian love chant. Did you ever hear that? When you were teenagers, did you ever hear that? Oh, it was the universal Hawaiian love chant. It goes, come, I want to lay up. But at any rate, he approaches her and is trying to woo her, and she flames him and burns the bristles right off of him. So they each start summoning divine allies, and he brings in clouds and mists which start cooling her fires, and she has her gods divert them, and then she surrounds him with fires, and he's endangered. So he starts digging water pits, and she's endangered, and it's a seesaw battle going back and forth and back and forth. And it's all controlled by the love-making god. And finally, they exhaust each other, and they respect each other, and they unite. And they produce the royal Hawaiian lineage. It's from the union of Pele and Kamapua'a. And they divide the whole land up between them. And this is the mild version. There are all sorts of variants of the story. Like the eight-headed lono is a variety of a huge octopus that attacks him. And in the battle with her, she summons free-ranging vaginas to distract his attention while she tries to zap him with fire. But there's all kinds of things like that. I want to read part of the chant of it. It's the last reading for tonight. I won't read it in Hawaiian again. Take care when you give, this is his name chant. Take care when you give birth, Hina. The eyes of the hog, they glance to the heavens and glance to the mountain. The son of Hina is a hog with 8 eyes. By Hina art thou, by Kahiki Iula, by Kahiki Iilei, thou art little Lono, thou art little Lono. My eye, my love, O Lono, follow until thou liest on the altar of Olopana, the altar of our chief. This is your name, make answer. So it's a combination of sacrificing of a pig and the name chant of Kamapua'a. I'm lost in all these names here. And a whole bunch of other things. Clearly we see that again, we have Kamapua'a as another variant of Lono. That this is again a fertility god and a generative god. In fact, the opposite pole from Pele. And it's clear that the love-making god that brings the 2 poles of his own being together is Lono. And this is indeed a myth of creation and generation and production. It's the same kind of idea. Hey, we're down to a page and a quarter of notes. In Hawaii, lovemaking or generation is the attribute of Lono. But what we're looking for in this again is another statement of agency. It doesn't have to be, but this is another case of polar agency. That is of Pele being one pole and Kamapua'a being the other pole. Agency can be triune or it can be spectral. You can send out 7 brothers and sisters as agents. In terms of transcendence as a result of distributing agents, the principle works the same. It just so happens that the simplest is polar agency, distribution in poles. It's the simplest form, and this is a very simple presentation. But the reality is not simple. The purpose of agency is just the opposite. It is ramification, distribution, and complication. It is the ability to do many things. The relationship of administration from a single source through a distribution is the common thing that has permeated all religions, especially that of the Muslims. It is the problem of the one and the many, which we trace back to its source in Platonism. The Muslims got it from the scrolls from the library at Alexandria. So we're looking at what results in complication. So let's combine this principle of distribution through agents together with the principle that we have been looking at for the last couple of years, dualism. Last year we saw irresolvable intellectual dualism in Persian religion and mythology. It was terribly frustrating. It was deep, 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 but it was frustrating. It was irresolvable. You couldn't get anywhere with it. Insoluble, because there was always another point, counterpoint, another, it went back and forth. This year we've been seeing that in Hawaiian mythology, dualism as the simplest way of describing the whole, such as the whole being the islands and the sea, or the whole being the earth and the skies, or the whole being space and the stars. It's a piebald reality, and the nature of the piebaldness indicates the scope of the creative activity. The stories from this evening add another dimension and a richness to this kind of outlook. By combining the principle of agency and the principle of polarity, we can see how creation is accomplished and appreciate the glory of it. From the myth of Kamapua and Pele, it becomes very clear that they represent elemental creative agencies, and their interaction is lovemaking. They represent the primary creative elements: fire for Pele and water for Kamapua. This is not just for the Hawaiians. In every mythology, if you remember when we looked at the Greeks or when we looked at the Hindus, the primary creative elements are fire and water. Even in horoscopes, where you find the distribution of planets primarily in fire and water, you find a very great creativity in the individual. By the way, Van Gogh, that's the whole of the Van Gogh story. It's a lot of fire and water in his chart, and the interactions between the fire and watery planets. Nothing can live without water, but nothing can live without warmth either. So what we're looking at when we look at visible creation and the endless variety in form, in color, in sound, all of that, if we look in the ultimate potentials within the absolute, time and space, we're finding something that relates ultimately to the spirit of fire and to the spirit of water. Or if we're looking at proto-spirit and cosmic root substance, modal prakriti, that is again a relationship of a pliable form that can be anything and a potential spirit that can potentially direct anything. As we come more into existence, we have spirit and matter. Purushara prakriti. We have, again, fire and water. Even in sensible space, we see the stars as fire and space as water. So they are the primary elements. We can see the dualism of them in everything. However, we don't know something until we have experienced something. When we want to know something new, we put forth a creative idea, or we put forth a tentative hypothesis, even a speculation, a creative speculation or a philosophical guess. These are our agents. We put them out for new experience because we can't experience something we haven't experienced before, so we put something out as an agent, even if it's just a creative idea or a hypothesis. Our projections congeal and interact like fire and water in the unknown. They activate the elements, and out of that comes the experience, and we grow. In this process, we are bonded in creative love to the things we experience. This is why Hi'iaka always gets the guy, because there is a bonding in love to something that you've tried to create, or something that you've tried to interact with, to know in a hypothetical manner. In the sacrifice of creative impulse, it's all spent. We give out everything. The essence then returns to the creative source, which is then raised to a new level of fiery creativity. And understanding, it rises to a new fluidic form. So this principle of putting out agencies and rising as a consequence of them is something whereby the principle of dualism, in a vertical sense, is responsible for all of the entire hierarchical creation. Nothing is lost from the most minute elemental experience all the way back to the subtlest, most rare awakening that is the consequent experience of all the new activity of all of the creative hierarchs. The same principle works all the way through things right from the beginning. So everything, ab initio, from the Supreme Being, right down through us, right down to the elements of earth and air and water and fire, it's the same principle of agency and of polarization. If we consciously bring this as a sacrificial activity, sacrificial of self and selfishness, there's no limit to what we can accomplish, either as an agent or as an administrator of creative power. There's nothing that we can't do. And if we once understand this principle, if we're willing to try different things, and if we're willing to have the patience when we're acting in an agent form to learn and do something completely different, there's nothing we can't learn. On the other hand, there's no degree of spiritual awakening or awareness or of universal power that we can't reach to by this same principle. It is, in fact, we can't sustain complications by seeking more complications, but the deeper that we go in one direction into this unified simplicity of the one spiritual being, the more we can sustain and hold of the ramifications and details of creative consciousness. So there's no limit to the degree of purpose, no limit to the degree of experience that we can attain. That's it. What we're going to do next time is we're going to begin a new series on Welsh mythology. We're going to go into the Mabinogi, and we're going to look at least into the 4 branches of the Mabinogi and maybe a few other things along the way. And we're going to take some of these ideas